Perfect. Well, we've got some people coming in, and looking forward to having a good conversation today. So, welcome everybody. Really pleased to have Michael Harker from Enigma Research coming back and doing a follow-up piece to his research back in April. So, back in April, we were looking at what people were thinking about in terms of coming back to attractions, what their thoughts were going to be, what would need to be in place, and the different elements of COVID. So now that Enigma's done some research with major attractions that have reopened and looking at what people are experiencing, what their impact is, what their interest is in coming back, and recommendations to other people as well, back to the attractions in terms of the different pieces of COVID-related care, cleaning, how that's all being impacted in terms of everything from soup to nuts, from restaurant experience to attraction experience to sponsors. So, Michael, I'm not meaning to take away all of your research findings, but I thought I would lay the groundwork for that, and I will turn it over to you to introduce the piece. So, thanks, Michael, for joining us.
Yes, well, thank you, Brad, and welcome everyone. Welcome to my wine cellar. This is I'd love to be in a boardroom with a nice view of the city behind me, but we know that doesn't happen these days. And instead, I'm down here in the wine cellar, which is pretty good, and I don't get a lot of traffic from family members cruising through here, so it's nice and private. And it is afternoon, so depending how the session goes, I might just be wrapping up in that wine cellar when I'm done. But in any case, I'll give a brief introduction, and I've got a few housekeeping items, and then we'll just dig right into these survey reports that I know everyone's been waiting to see and hear about. So first, quick introduction. So I'm Michael from Enigma Research Corporation. Our company specializes in doing research related to events and event marketing primarily. And I've personally worked on more than 1,000 event-related projects in my career as an event researcher. And I also teach event management part-time at our local college, and I sometimes go by the name The Event Professor. And if you go to Enigma's website and look under stories, you can see some of the fun stories that I publish, and you can subscribe at the very bottom to get your own personal email of the fun things that happened to me in my life as an event researcher. So if you're not already on that, please check it out one of these days. And I just want to extend a thank you to Brad from Sponsor Circle. It's we are not really, we're awesome researchers, but we don't do a ton of webinars, and we really needed somebody who was an expert at putting these on and promoting them and coaching us. So I'd like to thank Brad and his team at Sponsor Circle for hosting us on this today. So we thank you for that. And I just want to add in a little bit of background. Brad touched on it a little bit earlier. At the beginning of the pandemic, we felt that there was a need to survey people's intentions to return to live events, because we're sort of the voice of event research, if you will. And we ended up doing a survey of 2,000 attendees to all sort of past attendees to events, and asked them a bunch of questions. And it wasn't really a time to try to raise funds from clients and partners for a study like that. So we distributed it for free to hundreds and possibly thousands of events worldwide, and that's still available. So if you haven't seen that, a couple of months ago, we published the Return to Live Events survey, which is very informative, and that can be found on Enigma's website and in other places if you Google it. But anyway, we were asked at that time what we would do for a follow-up. And what we thought was that, now that some things are reopening, and not very much in the event world, but similar things like live attractions are reopening, we thought we should get out there and talk to some of the people who have visited these events and find out what they experienced and what they liked and didn't like, and if they'd come back, like Brad mentioned. So that was the motivation for doing this. We weren't able to distribute it for free. It's a little more expensive to survey that kind of audience instead of just the general population. So we make it available in a webinar plus report format, which leads me to my next thank you. And I do want to thank all of our guests who who have subscribed to this. I know that this is not a climate where a lot of organizations, especially in events and attractions, have thousands for R&D, and even getting a few hundred to kind of buy into a project is sometimes difficult. So I do thank you for being a subscriber to our study here, and I hope you get a lot of value from it. And is that enough housekeeping yet, Brad? I think I probably have a bit more, but then I'll just jump into it. That's the thing with thank yous. If you forget, then you regret it later.
The only other piece I was going to say, is just in terms of housekeeping, is for anybody on the call, if you want to ask a question throughout, in the bottom center of the Zoom screen, there's a Q&A option. So you can click on there and you can ask any questions as we're going through. I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
All right. I love it, Brad. That was one of my things I was going to say, but you have a better voice, so I like it. All right, now I'm just going to go over the format of this report. And now, if you're watching this, you do not have a copy of this report yet in your hot little hands, but our designers are right now, as we speak, making customized versions for everyone. You'll get a version with your very own name on it, just right at the conclusion of this presentation. So you're going to have to follow along with me. You can't look ahead at the document, but you will have your own soon. So this is around a 55-ish page report, and the format we're going to take is I'll talk first a little bit about the methodology, just a few minutes because it's a research study and we've got to do that. And then we actually have a top 20 findings that are up front. So if somebody only wants to read a few pages, they can kind of read the beginning and leave it there. But if you're on this webinar, you want to go more in depth. So what we're going to do is I've divided it into 3 sections. And I'm going to take sort of the first third of the findings that are well grouped. I'll go over them real quickly, the highlights. Then we'll dig into some of the charts in the backup in the different section of the report. And then we'll pop back and look at the second third. And then we'll look at the highlights, or the supporting information, and then the final third. So it has a nice flow to it. The first is kind of about people's experiences and the precautions that they saw. Then part 2 is the difficult questions that we all want to ask. Like, did people feel that precautions were being adhered to and followed? And do people actually think that they might have caught a virus if there was one around? And then the third part, we have some other goodies that we think will help our customers with their reopening plans. So I'm hoping everybody see. Brad, am I on the screen here with this nice title page? Yes, we're there. Okay. And so I'm going to jump to the second page. And this is our methodology page, which if you've ordered this, you probably know a little bit already. But we surveyed 1,000 pre-qualified respondents who visited 5 of the kind of first major attractions to reopen post-pandemic in the US. And it ended up sort of being around 200 at each attraction. I will point out that, so they were pre-qualified. They had to have been to the attraction within the first few weeks of the reopening. And these were fresh respondents. So here at Enigma, we have a method where we can target people who attend things like state fairs or motorcycle shows, or, by going online and targeting people with those interests and getting them to do surveys. And that's what we've done here. So there would have been an ad that said, did you go to Universal Orlando? Can you click here and tell us your experience? And that's the methodology we use. These were fresh respondents. And I'm saying that because there's a lot of pandemic type response research around these days. And a lot of it comes from survey panels or databases. Some research companies have databases of 50 or 100,000 people who get compensated through cash or points to do surveys. And that's fine. That research has its place. But I prefer a kind of a pure database of fresh respondents for something like this, because you just never know if somebody is kind of just doing your survey because they want to get points and they weren't really qualified. So be assured that these are 1,000 verified respondents, and I can get into verification if anybody has questions about that. But I don't want to talk too much about methodology, so I'll just lastly review the 5 attractions so everybody knows what's what. Attraction number 1 is Disney Springs in Orlando. Disney Springs is owned by Disney, but it is not a big theme park like Epcot or Magic Kingdom. It is a dining and shopping and entertainment area. It has, believe it or not, been open since last May. It reopened, and it's been open all this time. So that was number 1. The second is the Fremont Street Experience. So if you go to Las Vegas and you go to sort of old Las Vegas, there's a big entertainment area that has a covered roof, and there's entertainment and buskers and bars and partying. And that's been open since early June. So that was our second target. That's free to get into, by the way. Third is Navy Pier, also free to get into. That's in Chicago, so a shopping and entertainment district with a few rides. And the fourth one we did was Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags Fiesta Texas. Those are 2 separate theme parks, and instead of surveying 200 at one of them, we surveyed 100 at each of those 2. And the reason for that is because they just reopened in late June and just got it, and it was easier for us to find, to sort of split it up and find respondents from, because it was only open for a few days when we did this survey, and we were able to get them. And then finally, everyone's heard of Universal Orlando, and that is a very large paid theme park, and that was the 5th. So there we are. All of these are reopened attractions, and let's see what our results are. So when you get your report, you'll find that the first few pages have our top 20 highlights, and I'm going to go over the first third of them here, and then we'll look at some backup data, and then we're going to pop back. So the first few questions, 1, 2, 3, are about, why did you go to the reopened attraction, and what was your general overall experience? And that's kind of similar to the questions that you would ask in ordinary times to gauge an experience. Now, we didn't really set out to do this research because we wanted to know these things, but it's a nice way to start a survey. You don't just survey somebody and then start asking them if they think they caught a virus or if they wore their mask. I mean, that's a little harsh. So you want to kind of warm up your respondents with nice questions like, why did you attend and what was your experience like? And since we ask those questions, we're reporting it here up front. So, but there are some good questions. One of them was escaping isolation. So people have different motivations because they're different attractions. Either they want to go shopping or dining or be with their family or go on rides. But a common thread was that everybody wanted to escape isolation. So that's perhaps not surprising, but it's kind of fun that it came up number 1. And I'll show you a chart on that in a couple of moments. And then we asked them to rate their overall experience. And then secondly, to rate their experience on a bunch of different aspects of their visit. And what we found is that most people thought everything was great. So if there's any kind of concern that a reopened attraction with a bunch of restrictions is not fun and people don't want to come back, we've determined here that if you do it right, people do want to come back. So look at these numbers. 87% rated their experiences overall as excellent or good. And then when we asked them to rate different aspects like entertainment and customer service, it all ranked high or rated high. And even when we asked directly, number 3, I'll show you, 73% rated the quantity of attractions opened as excellent or good. And most of these places didn't have everything up and running. So even still, you're getting 3/4 overall are giving excellent or good for the quantity of attractions open. So they're satisfied. So anyway, so that was kind of the startup. And once we get that out of the way, we ask people, we get right into the safety precautions. And we had a big list, and we said, which of these safety precautions did you observe while you were there? And what you'll find in the pages to follow is that most people observed that workers and attendees were wearing masks, that there are hand sanitization places everywhere, body temperature checks, and the majority of people had observed these, so that was good news. And then after that, for everything, so imagine you have a list of 12 items, and if you had observed 8 of them, then you would be asked to sort of rate how the attraction handled each one of them as excellent, good, fair, or poor. And what we found is that most people rated everything very good. There were a couple of things. So if you look at number 5, the distancing enforcement varied. Oh, sorry, I should be moving to the next one. If you look at number 6 here on the next page, so the visitors' safety, rated the safety precautions, and for the most part, they thought that they were well handled. There were some minor things at some of the attractions that could have been improved, but there weren't any really huge red flags that the precautions were starting to unravel and people were observing that they were poorly done. And I'm going to show you that in the chart in just a few pages here. So I'm going to, I've shown you the sort of first 7, and now I'm going to show you the charts, and then we'll go back and look at some of the rest of our highlights. So still on section 1 of 3. So here's our reasons for visiting. It's a 2-part question where we ask people, which of these reasons did you come to the attraction today? Yes or no? And then after that, we asked, what was your main reason? So this page here simply demonstrates that to escape isolation came up first, and then all of the other items like food and socializing and rides, and they're all there. And you can see there's a table underneath, and when you get your own report, you can analyze that and you can look at the motivations of people attending a theme park versus a shopping area, for example. Again, not a big highlight of our report, but it's a way that we had to start off our survey and warm up our respondents. So overall rating, look at this great news. So we've got 87% of just saying that their experience was excellent or good overall. This varied. In Universal Orlando, for example, you've got 66% saying their experience was excellent, and at Fremont, 48%, but for the most part, positive. So that's good news. And then the next page sort of shows you the 5, we asked 5 different aspects just to warm up our respondents. Like, what did you think of the customer service and parking and quality and everything? And if you look at the 4th pie to the right here, it says that 73% of people thought that the quantity of attractions open was excellent or good, so positive ratings. And now I'm going to jump into our safety precautions. You've got that on the screen. I know there's a little bit of a lag time, right, Brad? You can give me the thumbs up. So safety precautions, this is the list of things that we asked if people observed. And so we've got 96% observing that workers were wearing masks, 84% observing attendees were wearing masks, all the way down to rides and attractions operating with lower seating capacity at 50%. Now that's an overall. We know that some of these things don't happen at every attraction, so you can look at the breakdown underneath and learn, for example, that 99% of the people at Universal Orlando observed workers wearing masks, or that 87% of people at Six Flags observed that the rides had some kind of a lower seating capacity method happening. So this is showing us that these 1,000 attendees are observing that the precautions that are supposed to be happening are actually happening, and that's good news. So once we asked them this question, if anything that they had observed, they were asked to rate, and I've got this nice busy page here with 12 pie charts, and it is in descending order now of whether they rated them excellent, good, fair, or poor, and blue is excellent. So we actually have 97% of all these respondents are saying that the body temperature checks upon entry were either excellent or good. Workers wearing masks, rides operating with lower seating capacity, hand washing stations. You can see the blue plus the orange is excellent and good. So we're getting a strong majority of all of these attendees indicating that what they observed, the safety precautions they observed were being executed excellent or good. If you look towards the end, we've got things like attendees wearing masks or enforced distancing in lineups there at the bottom corner, and they've scored lowest, but that is mostly because this is an aggregate of all 5 attractions. And for example, the Fremont experience, you're not required to wear a mask. So we would find that to be lower in this overall average. But if you look at the breakdowns, once you get your own report, you'll see that where relevant, things generally ranked high. So I'm going to jump back to our highlights. And by the way, it's fine if questions come in while you don't have to just wait till the end. You can kind of type those in, and at the appropriate moment, Brad is welcome to put those in for us. But I'm just gonna, so now that was stage one, now the ones we've all been waiting for are the kind of tougher questions regarding whether or not people are following safety precautions and if they actually thought they could have caught a virus or transmitted a virus. So I'll proceed with those. Number 8, there's a little market research trick here. So what you do is, if you want to survey people and whether or not they speed in their car, if you ask somebody, do you ever speed? They say no. But then if you ask them, well, do you think your neighbor or the people on your street speed? And then they always say yes. So that's kind of the method that we've used here. And we've got a 2-part question. So part 1 is, and it's shown in number 8, is honestly, did you think that you followed the precautions? And 75% of them said yes, that they followed all the precautions. And 18%, so most of them are saying, oh yes, absolutely, I've followed the precautions as requested. Then part 2, we say, well, what about the other people that you observed? Do you think that they followed the precautions that they were supposed to? And it's still good, but generally they rate the others as being less conforming. And I'm going to show you those charts and how they're a little bit different. And then number 10 is the big question that we've all been wanting to ask is, do you think at the end of the day, through everything you experienced, if somebody there would have had the virus, what do you think your chances would have been of catching it? And a good number of people, like look at this, 37% feel that they would have been at least somewhat likely to catch the virus given everything they saw. And then the second question after that was, suppose you were an asymptomatic carrier of the virus, and given everything that you saw and all the precautions, what do you think the chances are you could have given it to someone else outside your party? And here we have 25%. And those seem like some scary numbers, but I'm going to show you some charts, and it's not quite as bad as it might sound in that summary because there are varying degrees, but I'll get to that in a moment. And then for number 11, we asked people that if they said that they thought they could have caught a virus, we want to know, well, why? What happened, or where was the gap, or what broke down that made you think that? So we asked that to all of those who were either thought that they could have either caught or transmitted the virus while they were there. And most of them blamed other people not wearing masks, or just that it was just plain too crowded. And there weren't really a lot of people kind of blaming the attraction or saying that things were poorly executed. It was just kind of there's things that happen, and I'll show you more on that. And then finally 12 and 13 I'll review here, and then we'll jump to some charts. A lot of our clients are interested in more advanced precautions like UV cleaning devices and apps that track people. So we've asked the respondents to tell us what they think of those, even though they weren't really happening at these events. At least we're getting a gauge from this audience. And then finally, we've got clients who are interested in food safety and whether or not people still want to buy food at attractions or events. And what we have found is that around 90% of the people who were there bought food and beverages, and most of them, when we did ask them, why they didn't, and it wasn't normally about COVID things, it was just because they weren't hungry or they were too busy or something like that. So I'll show you that chart. All right, so I'm now going to jump to the middle of this report so we can look at more charts, and then we'll come back here. Okay, so here it is, safety precautions, the extent to which respondents followed the required safety precautions. So these are the people who again, the people who say that they don't speed, and they say, all right, 75% said, oh, I followed all of the precautions. And then another 18% said that they followed most precautions. So most of the 1,000 people we talked to said, oh, yes, I followed the rules and I did what I was told, or at least for the most part. So then we do our market research trick and we ask the second question, which says, well, what do you think about everybody else? Do you think that they followed the precautions? And still pretty good results, but not quite as high as what we saw. So now we've got 33% saying that they thought everyone or just around everyone cooperated. And, a lot of people, this 48%, this light blue on the bottom. So if you add the dark blue and the light blue, you're getting kind of 3/4 of the people are kind of had the impression that most people were following the rules, and that's good. So the question is, what is the true value? Well, the market researcher in me wants to go somewhere between there. So kind of everyone likes to say that they're great and others don't follow the rules. And I'm sure we've all anecdotally heard these things these days, but I would put that at somewhere between, if you look at I'm going to go back a page. So somewhere between probably 93% and 75% of people are probably following most of the rules here. And you can look at the breakdowns by attraction because they vary there too, or by age or by other demographic things for that matter. But the message is most people think that most people are following all of the rules. And now another big hot topic that a lot of people are afraid to ask, but we're asking this for you. So the question was, imagine the people are in the middle of this survey and they were asked about all these precautions, and then we finally say, please be honest here. And what do you think are the chances that, given everything you saw happening there, that you could have caught this virus if there was other visitors who were carriers? And overall, out of the 1,000 respondents, we've got 7% extremely likely and 6% very likely. And then we got this kind of big chunk of 24% somewhat likely. So, maybe they're sort of more realistic. And when you add them all together, you get kind of a third, and that sounds pretty scary. But if you look at the breakdown, it's more like 1/8 of the people who just have the impression that something could have happened that would have made them catch this virus. They would be extremely or very likely. And then the vast majority of people are just, well, no, I don't think it was likely at all from everything that I observed. But we are concerned about those people who believe that they're likely to catch a virus. So we ask them right after that. So if they said they were extremely, very, or somewhat likely to catch it, then we said, well, why do you think that is? And we gave them this list. And the main reasons are others did not wear a mask, or it was just kind of too crowded to maintain distancing. The third one down there is precautions were poorly executed. So it's a concern, but it's not like everybody's walking out of these attractions saying, well, I'm going to catch the virus because they're not doing a good job. The people are feeling safe. So then the follow-up question, and then I have a nice little page here, which you can read on your own later, if people had other reasons, and some of them are amusing. Oh, my favorite is oh no, she's on another page. But here's one, I slipped and fell on a mysterious wet spot. So, people have their reasons as to why they think they could have caught a virus, but you can look through those. So then the next question right after that, we got that out of the way. We're like, okay, now suppose you had been the asymptomatic carrier and you were walking around, and do you think you would have given it to people? And I think maybe a lot of us wonder about that when we go to other attractions or stores or places with precautions. So we've got answers here. 10% said they were either extremely or very likely, and then another 15 would have said somewhat likely. So there's a fear out there that some people think that if they're a carrier, that kind of despite all these precautions, they might transmit something. And we asked them why, and this is a chart. And it's the same thing. It's the same as the other answers. We asked them why. Well, because others didn't wear masks, or it was too crowded. A lot of people said they didn't personally wear a mask. So, that would be a big reason. And if they said other, which was a good number of them, and again, they have some nice ones. And yes, this is my favorite comment here. Four down, there's a young lady at the Fremont Street Experience who says, I was hugging, shaking hands, and sharing drinks. So, there you go. How's that for an honest respondent, Brad?
A couple questions have actually popped up, Michael.
Oh, excellent. Well, this is actually an excellent time for that.
Perfect. One was thinking about the transmission perceptions that you've kind of just walked through. Do you have any sense of how that varies to how people perceive their exposure in other retail settings?
I don't think we had anything on there that sort of asked for a comparison between, this place and other places you go to. Well, we do have one coming up that does compare live events to, in a different way, compares live events to these attractions, but nothing really that kind of compares with the, the Walmarts and the big box stores and the other things, or the transit systems that we've been seeing. So I'm afraid I'm going to have a no on that one in terms of having a direct comparison. But you said there were a couple of questions, or?
Yeah, that would have created an interesting baseline. And then another one was about precautions. Did you have any sense of whether the precautions were consistent between the different venues you were surveying?
Oh, okay. So they were mostly the same. A big difference was that, as I touched on earlier, the Fremont Street Experience, it was not required to wear a mask for attendees or visitors. The other places it was. So there would have been that. Also, most of the place, if you go to Universal or Six Flags, the temperature checks, actually you got to see a picture of this thing. They have this kind of room you walk through to do your temperature check at Six Flags. It's pretty high tech. That was consistent, except at Chicago Navy Pier, the temperature checks, it seemed to be sporadic. I mean, it was just, they were doing them, but the amount of people who observed it was something like 20%. So that was different. But everything else in terms of distancing and having sanitization policies and people making announcements and things like that, that was all there to varying degrees. So I'd say the only real two big differences was the no masks at Fremont and the kind of seems to be inconsistent. I don't want to say inconsistent. Maybe they only were doing it sometimes, but the maybe the not so regular temperature checks at the entrances for Navy Pier.
And I guess the second part to that, the question that was just made, was whether or not some of the precautions were seen to be, too much or too little.
You'll see at the end. I mean, we have besides these guys, we have about 6 pages of comments and suggestions from people, and we did get a lot of anecdotes, probably on both sides, right? And that's one of those things I wish I would have asked. Overall, did you think it was too much, too little, or about right? I mean, that would have been so easy when you think of it now. But we've got people who say, the security has to get cracked down on this more because nobody's following the rules, and you'll see those comments. And then we've got people who say, I could barely walk 25 feet without somebody reminding me again, to keep my mask on or whatever, and that was frustrating. But I've got some anecdotes on that, but I don't have any direct measurement as to whether something was too much. Now, actually, we do have a measure at the very end, which I'll touch on it now. Most people said they would return or recommend it to friends. And if they didn't, we asked them why. And they had a few reasons. And one of them was gonna kind of, the precautions are detracting from my enjoyment. And, that showed up, but it wasn't a top reason. And I'm glad you bring it up because it's gonna come up on one of our later slides. All right, I'm just gonna jump to the next section here, if you don't mind, Brad, and then keep the questions going. So this next one here, this is our advanced or extensive precautions. So we asked the respondents, okay, here's some other things that are being proposed or that are happening in other places, and would each of these make you more likely, less likely, or around, as or would it make no difference to you if it was happening at attractions? So some of our clients are interested in UV light sterilization. It's scored very high here. We've got Now, I mean, we're not scientists, and I cannot speak to as to how effective UV is, or I understand it's supposed to be used in combination with other things. But as far as these 1,000 people are concerned, around half of them said that they would be more likely to go to an attraction if UV sterilization on surfaces was happening, and kind of just as many if you had to get sterilization on your hands upon entry, or even upon your shoes upon entry. So there was a good reaction to that. We also asked what people thought of these mobile apps that track people and I guess notify you if you were in a place where there was an outbreak, and got a mix there. So we've got kind of a third of the people are saying, yes, I'd be more likely to attend if that existed. And then you got a quarter of them saying, well, that actually would make me less likely to attend because they're sort of, anti that type of thing. And then there were a bunch of them who said it'd make no difference. So that's a decision for each different venue to make. And then the ones that didn't score as well, at the far right here, were having to have a virus-free documentation, if that ever comes to exist. Some people think that's great. A lot of people don't like it. So that's something to consider. And then we also asked what the thoughts were on restricting visitors who are 65 and over. And we just kind of threw that on the survey just to see where it would land. And there was a good amount of opposition to it. We got some comments too. So it scored sort of okay. Obviously not too well among older people, but it's there if anybody's thinking of that precaution and they want to know how people would react. Now, we have a couple of questions on food and beverage, and then I'm going to pop right back to the next, the third section. I think we've got a lot of time. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope I'm not talking too fast with my northern accent here, but somebody can let me know if I am. So food and beverage, a lot of our clients want to know, is anybody going to buy food or beverage? And like I told you in the highlight, 89% of the people we spoke to either got a full meal or a snack or a beverage. 11% said that they didn't get anything at all. That's all you need to know from this slide. The big one is why not? So this 11% who didn't get anything, the main reasons were not hungry, not thirsty, their visit was short, and concerned about virus or cleanliness was 21%. So let's think here. We've got 100% of our respondents. I got 11% did not purchase any food or beverage, and we asked them, well, why not? And now, what is it, 21% of them are saying. So this is not a big concern among this audience. It's a concern among some, and it does vary by age and by where they were, but not big issues. And I think that's good news for a lot of us. If they were the 89% of people who did purchase something, then we asked them to rate their food and beverage experience, just like we would in a normal survey, and it had things like variety and quality and how long it took and seating. But guess what? The highest rated items out of these 8 parameters were the safety precautions taken by workers and the cleanliness of the areas. So to give you, an indication of what is happening on the ground, imagine that. You got 1,000 people go to attractions, or so 890 of them are telling you about their food experience, and they're telling you that they thought the safety precautions and the cleanliness were actually better than the food and the beverage and the seating and the pricing and everything else. So that is a very positive indicator that the venues are doing the right thing here and making people feel comfortable. I love when we do it this way, because if you just ask direct questions like, did you think it was clean? And maybe they're a bit biased because they know it's a COVID type survey. But when you mix it in with the list and it shows up at the top, then that's real. So now I think I'm going to just jump to the final section here, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So all the way back to here, and I think we left last time at number 13, so we're going to start with 14, and I've got 7 more goodies for you here. Look at this, number 14. Again, we're in the event business, and a lot of the people who are interested in this research are running live events. So we asked directly, would you attend a live event if it followed the same precautions as this attraction that you're attending or you just attended. 64% agreed, so that's good. We've got a good, and it did vary depending on where they were, and I'll show you that. And actually only 14% disagreed, and there were 22% who were unsure, so maybe they thought, well, I'd have to look into it or whatever. So what we're finding is positive results on that too. And then here's some that I think my my marketing and event organizer clients will like. Visitors felt safe and some would pay more. Look at this. 81% agreed the attraction succeeded at keeping visitors safe during the pandemic. And then there was a kind of a disagree and a not sure in there, so to make up that other, so positive. And 43% would pay more to visit if safety precautions meant that fewer could participate. And I think that's important because everyone's reopening at lower capacity. I mean, if you've been in the event business the last few years, you know that VIP type experiences are huge. There's a segment of the population who just wants to spend more. And I mean, they've also been not doing anything for a long time. So it could be a really good opportunity to put together that sort of VIP experience and take advantage of the fact that there's more space or however you can package it. So I like that result. And number 16 and 17 kind of go together. A lot of our clients are brands and sponsor agencies. And of course, that's Brad's field here. So we had a few questions on here regarding sponsors and brand activations. The first one was kind of a copy from our last study where we kind of had part one, like what do you think of sponsors in general who are involved with attractions? And then we asked part two, well, what do you think of the sponsors that are kind of sticking with this reopening and attraction and everything else? And when we did the event study, we got a really good lift there, which was great news for sponsors because everybody feels great about companies that are supporting the reopened events and all that. What we're finding here is that there was no movement, unfortunately, but that happens sometimes. So we don't have any evidence to think that anybody feels better about brands that are supporting reopened attractions than they felt about them before. And that's too bad, but we've measured it and there it is. However, the good news is number 17, and a lot of my agency and brand clients will like this, is brand activations continue to be popular. So we asked respondents, would you go to a brand activation if it's followed the same precautions that you are seeing here today? And we're getting 3/4 said that they'd be very or somewhat likely to interact. And that's great news. So there's no sort of measured big fear to touch brand activations or go into them because of what's been going on. And I like that result. Number 18 and 19 were, kind of at the end to wrap up a survey. It's kind of traditional, say, would you return to this experience again? And would you recommend it to family and friends? And on both counts, we're getting 95% of our 1,000 respondents said that they would be likely to return to the attraction or they would recommend it to family or friends. So a huge number. And then we asked that 5% who didn't want to come back, just for due course, we asked them why. And they shared those reasons, and I'll show you those in a moment. And lastly is number 20. At the end of all of our surveys, and probably every survey should do this, we ask people to give their comments and suggestions. And I've got 6 pages of categorized comments and suggestions verbatim, the way people gave them to us. And they cover a lot of topics like masks and precautions and distancing, and we'll look through those. I'll show you a few pages towards the end here, but you can look through them more closely when you get your own report. So I'm going to jump now to the slides that back up these last few findings, and then we'll look at the comments, and then we can have a nice Q&A session if anybody wants. So towards the end of the report, we had a nice thing that said, here are some statements regarding reopened attractions, and can you agree or disagree? And that's where we got a lot of these nice numbers. And pardon me, I'll go over some of my favorites. The one on the far left, I would attend a live event if it followed the same precautions as this attraction. I got 64% in blue are agreeing there. So that's good news for our event organizer clients who want to have a a business case to reopen. And we've been saying for a long time now, it's frustrating. The attractions are opening everywhere. They're following certain precautions. They're getting results like this. Events are canceling, and a lot of events could implement these things. I mean, maybe, hey, if it's a EDM concert, maybe that's harder. But if it's a boat show, I mean, you could do anything at a boat show that they're doing at these attractions in terms of precautions. So that's great news, and it's backed up by this data. I also like the one in the middle. So that's the one that shows you 43% would pay more to visit an attraction or a live event if it meant fewer people could participate, and that's a pretty good number to work with too. And then, yeah, look at that. Look at that one on the far right. 81% of our 1,000 respondents agreed this attraction has succeeded at keeping visitors safe during the pandemic. So that's from the front lines, people who have actually experienced and been brave enough to go to reopen things, and that's what they're telling us. Some of the big numbers, look at, I mean, some of them like Six Flags is 85% feel that they've been keeping visitors safe. So I'll touch on some of these brand questions, and here's the one I was telling you about. This is our two-part. The left pie is, you know, in general, what do you think about, I mean, this is general sponsorship research stuff, but in general, what do you think about brands and sponsors that are at attractions? And very favorable is blue, and somewhat favorable is orange. So it's a pretty good result. And then we asked them right after that, well, what do you think of the sponsors and brands that were among the first to support, you know, this reopened attraction? So it's very direct now, and there's like no movement. In fact, it's actually a little bit lower. And I don't know if Brad, you're the sponsorship person, maybe you can chime in on why that might be. But before that, I'll just show you one more slide, which is better news. Is here's our brand activation slide. So some data showing you that brand activations are not going to die. If you produce a brand activation and you follow the precautions that people are seeing, like the masks and the distancing and the sanitization, and put the message out that you're doing things right like everybody else. We've got 3/4 of the people said that they would interact. So I like, Brad, did you have any insights to share with me on that sponsorship thing of why do you think that there's no movement in terms of, you know, there's no good feeling of those brands are great for being here at the theme park and through the reopening?
Well, my initial thoughts on it are, I think it might be just the type of attraction. So that brand engagement at an amusement park would feel very different, probably have a different response than something at a festival or at a ball game. So that there's a different type of engagement, different type of audience mindset. Would be interesting to see if you've got any feedback on the type of activations that people were engaging with, and whether there was some thought from the respondents on, you know, are there things they would do and not do in terms of brand engagement?
Yeah, I'd love that. And hey, maybe an idea for the next study. But it was kind of a busy survey, and we have a few sponsor and brand activation questions on there. But I would want to ask those things. You know, would you sit in a vehicle? Would you sit on a motorcycle? Would you play with an interactive kiosk? You know, would you enter a contest? All of these things that happen, I'd like to have that breakdown. And I don't know if anybody else is collecting that, but would have been easy to do here. But hey, you know, we got a lot of time left. We can do more research. So I like that suggestion. So so the last couple of slides I got here for you, and then well, we're really blasting through the hour. When I told you 95% of the people would return. So this is, imagine 1,000 people. After your experience and all the precautions and everything you saw, how likely would you be to return to this very attraction? I've got dark blue, 63% extremely likely, 22% very likely. That orange 10% is somewhat likely. So 95% at least somewhat likely. Most of them are very likely or extremely. And there's a bit of variation when you compare by attraction, but I think the message is clear. And then when we say, okay, that 5%, well, why not? Look at that, kind of like we said earlier, Brett, safety precautions detracted from enjoyment is up there with dissatisfied with experience. And there's always a reason why somebody might not come back to something for another reason. And that's on there. And a few people kind of gave us their own other reasons, and they're here. But it's all over the map. I mean, I will not go back until masks are not required. We got a lot of that. Or, they should have water stations for people to hydrate. A lot of discussion. I'll show you in a moment. A lot of comments on masks and heat and how those don't work well together. This chart is almost the same. It's just part 2. Would you recommend it to family and friends? And we're getting kind of the same result. High majority, yes, they would. If not, why not? Same thing. Safety precautions detracted from enjoyment. Some people said it was poorly executed, but again, this is a small group of these 1,000 respondents. All right, so that I've gone through our top 20, and I've kind of broke it down in those 3. I hope that worked to kind of have it in the 3 parts. And there's a big section on comments, and one of the reasons you're going to get your own report very shortly. It'll get emailed almost immediately at the conclusion of this. But sometimes if I give people the report in advance, they get to the comments section, and it's just really engaging, and you just sit there and read them all, and they're kind of funny, some of them, and then they stop listening to me, right, Brad? So if I do that in advance, nobody listens to me. So I got to give you the report after, so you can have some bedtime reading and read these comments. And I mean, there's a lot of good insight here. There are a lot of I've got comments about cleanliness, comments about distancing. I have 2 full pages of people who are making comments about masks and how they should be used and when they should be used and who should be telling them what to do. And I mean, that's all on there. And a lot of them are rants, but a lot of them are good points. But just remember, everyone, 95% of the people said they would come back. So these are, for the most part, are constructive suggestions. This is not I'm never coming back for this reason and here's my rant. It's you asked me for a comment, suggestion, and I'm giving it to you. So I find a lot of our clients, you read through something like this, you're like, oh my God, everybody hates masks. But the people said they'd come back. So that's what it is. And then at the very end, comments about precautions, and I'll let everyone go through those on their own. But now it is time, Brad, for the Q&A. Did any of our, hopefully nobody shut off the computer and everybody's still there and just putting in more questions than I can answer. But if I can't get to you now and you're a subscriber, I'll always do an email response if I can't get to you, because I can talk about this for a very long time.
Great, thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, there's a couple comments and a couple questions for you. One, just sort of, the awareness piece. It was just interesting to see that the awareness, with removing COVID from the conversation for sponsor awareness, was pretty much baselined against the sponsor awareness with COVID. So that was kind of just an interesting comment that somebody had made. They were found it strange. But it's,
you mean the 2 side-by-side pies with the what do you think about sponsors in general, and what do you think of the ones that have been here for the reopening?
Yeah, there wasn't any movement one way or the other.
It's down. I'll be frank, we ask a lot of questions like this, and normally the hope is that we're going to have data that shows that people love sponsors, and then you go to your sponsors or brands, go to their management, and they say everybody loves us because of what we're doing, and it's a kind of thing we ask a lot. But I almost never see anything go down. I mean, sometimes you see it flat, but I think maybe it's this makes no difference, right? I mean, look at the gray part here. So 32% of the people say that it makes no difference to them if there are attractions or sponsors at attractions in general. And I know that sponsorship people don't like to admit that all the time, but there's a part of the world that is oblivious to sponsors and doesn't care about sponsors, and that's showing here. Then we asked them, well, what do you think about the companies that are here for this reopening? And then even more of them are saying that there's no difference. So I'm just really grasping that it's not a thing. So there's not a lot of evidence there was on that earlier event study we did, and probably other sponsorship research, there's evidence to go and say, tell the world how great your brand is because you're supporting something that's reopening, but we're not getting it here on these attractions. And maybe it's just because a lot of these are commercial by nature anyway, like Fremont Street Experience or Navy Pier or Universal, like it's just all packed with brands anyway, and that's what it is. So maybe they just think, hey, these brands are going to be here no matter what, and there isn't any of that, I love them for bringing back this event like you might get in a sports team or an arts event.
It'd be interesting to see if you did something similar with festivals, teams, etc., sports, whether or not that awareness changed, sort of in future research you were doing. Another comment was, were there any expectations for live events moving into stadium or theater about precautions that would need to be taken that are different from what you surveyed here?
Sorry, you're asking me if there
people are expecting different COVID precautions or heightened precautions, I guess, moving into live events.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of our subscribers to this are in the live event business, and I mean, I think they're hoping to. I hope too that this data is going to kind of help them move their case forward. Like, hey, we can reopen like an attraction can if we follow the same precautions. I think for something, and it's nice because this is all broken down, and a theme park is not quite the same as a shopping area, but they're kind of the same, and maybe you can look at some of those cases. If you're similar to that, so if you're a street festival or something where people are kind of walking around doing stuff, I think you can probably easily make the case that, well, hey, if we follow everything that Six Flags does and we do that at our street festival, then that should be safe too. And I like that story. If you're vastly different, so if you're a sports stadium event, I think this data would help build that case. But I mean, everybody knows that a sports stadium event is not the same as a theme park. So probably you would want to take some of these or implement as many as you can. And probably the big difference is the distancing. The things like sanitizing and temperature checks and those kinds of masks. I mean, these precautions can be done anywhere. People wear masks on airplanes. And that's their rules. And so I would say that those transfer over well. I guess the big question is the distancing. So if you have to be able to demonstrate that you can effectively distance people at a large stadium event, but even indoor events, like I said, boat show a while ago. Boat show is not, in concept, is not a lot different from a shopping area when you kind of think about what people are doing. They're entering an area, they're walking around, looking at things. Maybe you have to have some kind of a navigation system so they can, follow directional signage so they don't cross paths. You could have the people within the exhibits with their own, following their own precautions, much like they're doing at theme parks and other attractions. The big question is that it's indoor, and what we've surveyed here is primarily outdoor. There are indoor things and indoor rides at theme parks and indoor shopping and restaurants in these areas too, but it's not an exact comparison if you want to talk about something only indoor. But I think it helps make the case for most events.
And I guess there's good examples.
I hope that answered our question, but I have that thing. You give me a one.
There might be some good examples from other areas. I know that New Zealand has opened up live sports, and they've got stadiums full of people coming in for rugby matches, etc., and seeing some interesting stuff in Korea, bringing back 100,000 person conferences. with all of that. So it'd be interesting to see whether or not that learning comes through to what's going on in North America.
Well, I mean, I would say I've been close to this project. I mean, we surveyed the people, and we see the results coming in because they don't all come in at once. So you're kind of living it, and then you're analyzing the data and discussing it with people. And I mean, I feel by looking at this, I feel like I'm safer at a theme park than I am at a retail store or something like that, because it's a big organization and they've got the staff to enforce things, and people are paying money to get in, and they've got some budget to do it right. So, and I know that we see, in the last few days, we see big numbers out of states of more cases. Again, I'm not a scientist and I don't have access to where these outbreaks come from, but it would surprise me if they were coming from these large attractions that have all sorts of precautions and people telling us that they walk through and that they feel safe. My sense is that these outbreaks are probably coming from people or places that don't have a lot of regulation. And again, it's not my field, and you want to be careful these days of just saying what's right and what's wrong, because there's so much going on. But my sense is that these attractions are doing it right, and that the people are safe.
Another question was around the buying habits. So you had some interesting stats on what people were buying in terms of purchasing food on site, as well as the interest in actually paying more for I guess a safer experience. But did you have anything that was measuring just change of buying habits while people were on site?
No, I mean, the reason why we asked the food question was because we just were concerned that some of our clients who are in the food and frankly they're food and beverage brands, and they're interested in in knowing do people feel safe going to an attraction and buying beverages or whatever. So that was why we asked that. We didn't really get into are you going to buy more or less. I think we were pleased to learn that most people are making purchases as always, and I do like that result about the people wanting to spend more. And let's face it, I mean, attractions and events, before all this happened, I mean, it was about people sitting at boardroom tables and discussing, well, how can we get more wallet share out of our attendees? I mean, that happens everywhere, and that's why the prices and the merchandising and all the packaging and VIP experiences have emerged so much in the last few years, because there's a demand for it. So I think that any attraction that has lower capacity is struggling. So why not try to capitalize on that? Have something available for the person who's willing to spend more, whether it be front of the line or VIP or coming in early or staying late or whatever it is that you can just add that value, because while a lot of people are struggling, a lot of people are still working and they've got money to spend. So let's have something for them.
Yeah, definitely. We were talking earlier that concept of the VIP fast pass, line bypass premium that you could bring in. I could see that being really attractive for attendees.
Yeah, it's if you read through the comments of this, we have a few comments, not always positive on those things. I mean, not everybody likes that system. I guess you like it if you love it if you're paying for it, and you hate it if others are paying for it, you don't have it. It seems to me like that's been on hold just throughout the startups phase, and maybe they don't need to have a fast pass or a front of the line when you're operating at 30%. But I can tell you though, just having studied enough events and attractions, there are people who would pay for it, even if there's no measurable difference. There's an audience that wants to have a different color pass or wristband so they could be first, and they really don't care if it's much better than the other one. It's a special occasion, or that's just the life they live. So I would always want to have those options available even with a reopening.
Was there much sentiment to people, just the fact that the capacity was lessened, whether that was actually more attractive or less attractive to their experience?
We got a lot of comments, people saying it was, well, I wouldn't say, we had a few comments, people saying best day ever, at the theme park, because I suppose it was lower capacity in the lines. But at the same time, we had people saying, well, half the stuff wasn't open. So it's a mix. But we do have that question up front that said, well, how would you rate the variety of, or the number of attractions that were still open, or number of features or things going on? And we got a pretty good result there. So certainly some people would be disappointed because not everything was open, but the majority of the people thought that it was good. And at the end of the day, 95% of the 1,000 people from these attractions told us that they would go back, and they would also recommend it to their friends. So I'm glad that we did this piece of work, because I think there's probably a lot of boardroom tables at attractions are just saying, well, if we reopen with precautions, no one's going to want to come, or they're going to have a bad experience, and it's going to ruin our brand, or and I think it sounds to me that people are just happy to be doing something, and if they got to follow rules, then they will. And if they end up having to do that for weeks or months, then they'll just get used to it.
So what would you follow this research up with?
What would we follow this? Wow. Well, we did get asked that question when we did the last study. I would like to do the same thing on live events. We actually thought, we almost thought of putting into the mix of these 5 is that NASCAR. We've surveyed people who go to NASCAR using our methods and tracking them down, and it's not difficult. So we thought of having one of these columns, some of those early NASCAR races that happen, with limited capacity. So, but then we decided it would have just been an odd mix to have 4 attractions plus NASCAR. So we thought, I'd like to do maybe 5 reopened events. Actually, I think we just heard, Kansas State Fair in Kansas is going to be happening. They've announced that. I think that I'd like to maybe survey a couple hundred people from there, a couple hundred from NASCAR, and other events that are brave enough to reopen first. If we can capture some data and initial impressions, maybe that could be used to help other stuff reopen. I think that's what I'd love to do next. And all we need is for the stuff to reopen, Brad. That's all. I'm ready to survey.
Slowly get
survey them if they didn't go to anything.
Yeah. And as we're starting to see the sports all come back online in the next few weeks, it'll be interesting to see how that progresses forward.
It sure will be. I mean, the sports have that additional challenge of the players have to be healthy and all of those things, or it can't really be done. But on top of the whole managing the live attendees, but something like a state fair, a state fair is a perfect example. I don't know the folks at Kansas State Fair, but I'd say good on you, because if Six Flags and Universal can put on their events with precautions, or put on their attractions with precautions, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, I know it's temporary and it's not 12 months a year, but what happens at a theme park? Rides, shows, food, wandering around looking at stuff. That's what happens at fairs. So why shouldn't they be able to reopen under the same precautions if they do it right? And I'm glad that at least some of the events are taking the steps to start up.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Michael. It's been really enlightening. I'm really glad to have a follow-up to your piece from earlier this year. Any sort of last words of wisdom?
Oh, last words of wisdom. Do you have a half hour? Or no, I'm just kidding. No. Last words of wisdom. I mean, I'm glad that we did this study, and I appreciate the support of you guys and our subscribers, and I hope that it gets used. At first it was kind of data to help reopen, right? So attractions are reopening. What are the learnings from there? And let's transfer that to another attraction that wants to reopen, or an event that wants to reopen, or anything that wants to reopen, and maybe they can, you know, use it for that. What I prefer to see this used for is the business case, where somebody says, you know, there are no motorcycle shows, and you know, nobody wants to move on motorcycle shows reopening. And I'd like somebody to take this data and say, well, motorcycle shows are probably kind of like attractions. I mean, I know they're different, but look at the success they had at these early reopened attractions. And why don't we transfer that, you know, use the data to convince an industry or a government or a convention center, or, you know, something to say, look, we can do this. The people aren't going to hate it. They aren't going to walk away thinking that they got a virus. And that's what I hope that it gets used for. So I'm hoping that our subscribers can share any success stories with us, and we can pass those on. And I mean, like I said earlier, I can always thank you for those passing on those questions. I'm sure there are lots more questions, but if we don't have time for it, the people can always email me, and I always respond to my emails when it's about our studies. So
perfect. Yeah, and, you know, happy to include your email on the follow-up email I'll send out tomorrow to everybody who's on attendance and people who signed up but couldn't make it, so they can track you down and get some further insight from you. And you'll be sending out.
Yeah, and watch your inboxes. Watch your inboxes, because your own study like this with your own name on it is coming. Our designer made them with everyone's name.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Michael. Look forward to reading this in more depth and seeing what our next steps are, and being able to share again with everybody else who's part of this.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Ready for the wine cellar.